Welcome to the fourth episode on the Soil Doctor tool, where I dive deep into the principles of organic nutrient management. There are three macronutrient cations that are critically important to pay attention to: calcium, magnesium, and potassium. A fourth, sodium, is not a nutrient and should be minimized as much as possible. But these four ions all compete with one another for plant uptake. In topsoil, the majority of these cations are adsorbed or loosely held on the clay colloid, making them available for plants, though not necessarily soluble. Plants often get all the cations they need in topsoil simply from the enormous reservoir in the soil, and applying calcium, magnesium, and potassium is often unnecessary. In peat-based living soils, there isn't clay, so these nutrients don't exist in enormous quantities like they do in topsoil. In living soil, they must be applied, or usually must be applied, to reach sufficient levels for optimal yield and plant health. And they must be balanced against one another to optimize uptake. If there is too much magnesium, for example, the plant won't uptake enough calcium and potassium. Too much sodium can very quickly create a potassium deficiency, even if there's enough potassium in the soil already. The standard soil test was developed to measure cations on the clay colloid in topsoil. So it's a very imperfect test for soilless medias. But nevertheless, I still think cations are best managed using both the standard test and the paste test. This is particularly true of magnesium, and let me explain why. If both calcium and magnesium are low on the paste test, let's say 30 parts per million of calcium and 18 of magnesium, I'd apply more gypsum to increase the soluble calcium. But if the magnesium base saturation percentage on a standard test is, let's say, 30%, I guarantee that more magnesium will release and flow into solution when gypsum is applied. So therefore, I would not apply more magnesium even if it's only 18 ppm on the paste test. I would simply observe where magnesium levels go on the next soil test after that gypsum is applied. This is why the Soil Doctor tool still requires you to enter cation levels from the standard soil test. It won't apply magnesium when the base saturation of magnesium is already high. There's a few other reasons too. Now here is the coolest part. The Soil Doctor tool uses a balancing algorithm that achieves sufficiency of nutrients, then it balances those cations. First, it sets a minimum sufficiency level for each nutrient. All soil target levels are presented in my online course, by the way. Next, it sees if any individual cation is excessive, and if so, it increases the target level for all the other cations to maintain balance. For example, if the target level of calcium is 150 ppm, but magnesium is excessive, the Soil Doctor tool may increase the target level of calcium to, say, 200 ppm to improve the balance of calcium to magnesium. And it does this by converting to what's called milliequivalence, which is a soil science unit that looks at the relative abundance of nutrients based on their atomic weight. So once it determines the optimal balance, it changes the target levels of calcium, magnesium, and potassium to achieve better balance in your soil. Now, it floats the target levels to an extent, but if something is extremely excessive, it doesn't keep raising them, it doesn't raise the levels of other cations infinitely, chasing balance. And this is where the algorithm works so well, doing all this complicated math just instantaneously. So let me walk you through how this works in practice. Let's say your living soil has 90 ppm of calcium on the paste test, but 70 of magnesium. This calcium to magnesium ratio is far too small. So the tool will adjust the calcium target up, essentially all the way to the solubility limit of gypsum, over 200 ppm. It obviously won't apply any more magnesium, and it will also suggest raising the potassium up to the upper end of the target range. Will this soil be perfectly balanced? No, definitely not, but it will be as close as you can get. Depending on the pH, the tool will recommend varying amounts of wollastonite, lime, and gypsum to increase calcium. It will suggest compost and or potassium sulfate for potassium, depending on what preferences you customize for your operation. while also suggesting alternative potassium sources to consider long-term. In other instances, it might recommend langbeinite, which is an organic source of both magnesium and potassium. The amendments it recommends are customized to each soil test and the inputs you enter about your operation. This tool is the pinnacle of nutrient management for organic production, especially in peat-based medias, and it happens instantaneously. Just as a philosophical aside, this approach is obviously based in calculations and precision and ppms, which I've often thought feels a bit hydroponic in nature. Living organic soils and organic farming in general have always attempted to go in the opposite direction of the hyper control of nature and the ppm focused approach to nutrient management, trying to put more faith in the biology of the soil to mineralize nutrients as needed. So in that way, I understand why this approach can feel a bit paradoxical or contradictory or even maybe inherently flawed. I've thought about this a lot, and where I've landed is you can have both. You can take the precision of hydroponics and apply it to the magic of living soils. Even if it feels contradictory, it's actually not. And in that seemingly paradoxical combination, you can get incredible results. So you can use the Soil Doctor tool and testing and ppms and things like copper sulfate and potassium sulfate and simultaneously be doing everything in your power to promote the magical and uncontrollable biological processes that create diversity and resilience in your soil ecosystem by doing things like minimizing disturbance and propagating indigenous microbes to use in your liquid feeds, making your own really high quality aged compost on site with local carbon sources, or trying to maximize species diversity. All of that is great. You can do all these things and use precision organic management. So hit the link below to get a soil test, then check out the Soil Doctor tool to customize an organic recommendation for your soil.